There's another word. And parenting, and parenthood, and fatherhood. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And fatherhood. Yeah. I don't know why this changed it. Okay, let me make that change, and I'll press the live button. Go ahead and save that. Come on back. Live. Hello, everybody. This is Rodney Kellum, the Fatherpreneur. Thankful to come to you one more night, one more episode with another amazing guest on my purpose-driven content series with another amazing father, by the way. And tonight's show is called, let me make sure I get my title right. It's called Education, Politics, and Fatherhood. And my guest tonight is an amazingly accomplished young man. Uh, he's been with some of the people that I truly respect and admire and have learned a lot from. And he was walking with them in real life, so he's a walking history book. He's an educator, he's a politician, he's an art collector, he's an all-around amazing man. So please welcome for tonight my guest, Mr. Paul Hamilton. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Rodney. This is Denver.
Yep, interviewing from Denver. So it's a pleasure. And of course, we see some amazing pieces of art in the back, which we will get to in your story. And as I like to begin with all my guests, I want you to tell me a little bit about where you're from, where you're born and raised, and some of your experiences as a younger man.
Okay. Well, being 74 right now, there's a lot to talk about. But I was born in Pueblo, Colorado, which is 100 miles south of Denver. Not very many black people there. I lived with my mom and my stepfather. My father had left and moved to Detroit. And I would go when I was young to Detroit and visit him and his brothers who owned a filling station there. But I had a happy life as I was growing up. I didn't know about the racism and I wasn't conscious. But as I look backwards, I could see that, we had to go upstairs to the movie theater. We couldn't sit downstairs. And I can remember being turned down going to a nightclub when I came back from college because I was black. So even though Colorado has had a reputation of being, quote, liberal, it's only liberal compared to Mississippi and some of the other places. In my high school, there may have been 35 black students. And I was elected president of the school. What I call black magic. And black magic is saying, this is what I want in life. This is what I'm committed to. This is what I'm willing to pay the price. And then start looking for evidence to support that and being willing to pay the price. So becoming president of the school was one of those things. Another was to go to the University of Denver, which was the second most expensive school in Colorado. And my parents couldn't have sent me to a junior college, and I got there. So I've had a lot of experiences of just making things happen, or more properly, allowing them to happen. So that's brief.
You talk about something pretty amazing that I don't think people nowadays completely understand what you went through. Living at a time where segregation was the norm, even in your younger years, you said you really didn't recognize it because you're not being conscious about it. But by the time you got to high school and you chose to, hey, I'm going to run for president, what did that feel like in pretty much a small town, small black population in a place that a lot of people didn't look like you? What was it inside of you that said, hey, I'm going to do this? Despite what others may fear, what may hold other people back. What was it inside of you? What sparked you to say, this is for me?
Well, I just, said this is something I want to do. And so I put myself out there, and everything happened perfectly in order for me to do that. Again, this happened when I got into politics, and I became state representative. There, I had no money, no organization, knew nothing about politics, but I was just going to fight the establishment. I guess I've been a quiet rebel for a long time, and just kind of getting out of the what might be called normal. And so that's kind of what drove me. I grew up in the Baptist church, and in fact, I was even a Sunday school teacher while I was in high school. But I never could put all that together in terms of some of the theology. But I was preparing for a lesson that I was supposed to teach, and I came across this ask and you shall receive, knock and the door will be open. I said, that ain't true, so let me try it. So that's part of the basis of what I call now black power or black magic. And I've used that a lot to know. And I find what the limits are is that if I'm not willing to pay the price, and usually the price is not money, but it's, the willingness to change my attitude, willingness to get the skills that I might need or whatever it is, and then be persistent. And usually I'm pretty persistent.
So I want to apply that, I want you to expound on that, because you said you went to the second most expensive school in the state of Colorado.
Yes.
Not having the resources, your parents not having the resources. Can you tell us and sort of let us into that time in your life when you didn't have the resources, but with this mentality that you had, what were some of the things you did? Who were the people you talked to? What were the resources that you pulled together to make that happen?
Well, first of all, I was able to get a scholarship, tuition scholarship to DU. I was, in the upper 5% of my class out of 2,000 students there. Our graduating class was over 500. And also I was school president, so that helped out. And I remember my counselor, who my mother had when she was going there, she was surprised that I got a scholarship, So I got to DU, and I borrowed a lot of money. My mother went to work at the state hospital and was able to send me $50 a month, which helped me out a little bit. I didn't have money to go to a movie or those kind of things, and certainly no car and that kind of thing. But I was in Wonderland because I've always been very curious, and I've met all these people that I didn't even know existed. There were very few black students there, and still that's today. But while I was there at DU, I started reading about Africa and places like that. I said, I want to go to Africa. And well, the first time I tried that didn't happen. I went to Hong Kong, Japan, and the Philippines. And then the next year I said, I still want to go to Africa, so I did that. And I did that because I wanted to know, and I knew that what I was hearing a lot from the teachers and so forth wasn't probably what I needed to know. So I learned to become a fundraiser. I didn't know that's what it was, but I was telling people this is what I wanted to do and had no money. So one of the directors of an organization I was part of said, why don't you go talk to Vice Chancellor McCullum? And Vice Chancellor McCullum was the fundraiser for the University of Denver. So I went and told him what I wanted to do, and he helped me and with that, and then I borrowed some money and I was able to go. And so that's that part of that black magic of not knowing but being willing to put it out there and say, this is what I'm going to do, and start bringing resources to you, and then allowing people to be kind and generous.
The things that you're talking about are things that people struggle with every day. Yes. Where they may have a dream, they may have something that they want to do really, really bad, and they always put it in the back of their mind because they don't have the money, or they don't have a rich relative that can just finance that trip. So what you're saying, it almost seems like you didn't think in limited ways. You had an unlimited way of thinking.
Absolutely.
And that led you to an experience, into a place that a lot of people only dream. Well, really, so far you've talked about 3 continents, or 2 continents and 1 island that you got to go to during your college years. So this is during the years where people are broke. These are the years where people are still struggling to, get some snacks at night. But what I want you to tell us now was, it sounds like you went to, during this time, you said during the 60s, correct, to Africa?
1963 is when I went to Africa. I went to Kenya briefly. What's now Zimbabwe was Southern Rhodesia at that time, and then Bechuanaland, which is now Botswana. And I returned to the United States the day that the March on Washington occurred, and I couldn't get down to the march, so I missed that. So that was 1963.
Wow. And here, what's amazing to me is to this day, I fully understand, and most people know that Africa, the image of Africa that we see is 99.9% false.
Yes.
Or a very small part of it that's blown up, or a very bad exaggeration. Tell us about your experience, what you learned going to the physical places that we only see on TV and hear about in myth and see things made fun of. What was your experience? What was the first thing you said, oh, about when you landed on the continent of Africa?
Well, let me go back to Asia, because that's where I went first. I went to Hong Kong, which I was told was the third highest standard of living in Asia. And I said, oh my God, because I saw people on the street pulling up a curb in order to sleep. And I saw shanty towns in which, you just couldn't believe it. And they were building what we called 7-Ups at the time. And in one room, which would be like a 12 by 12 room, there would be 10 people in there. And they were, that was adequate housing. And I said to myself, wow, we have no idea what poverty is in our country. We're poor because we choose to be. That this country has the resources, but not the political will. In other places, they don't have the resources. So when I went to Africa, I found, well, first of all, the image of animals. I literally went to the zoo, which was in Kenya, the game park, to see animals like the giraffe and the lions and so forth and so on. And so, yes, there are wild animals in Africa, but so do we have wild animals in Denver and in any other place, So, but that's the thing that the Europeans, really want us to think. I was amazed to see the cities, the huge cities, Cairo, Nairobi was a beautiful, beautiful city. And even what that time was called Salisbury in Southern Rhodesia. And that didn't fit the pictures. So as a teacher, and I've been teaching for over 50 years, I always put up a map of Africa, and surrounded it was pictures of cities in Africa.
Wow. We talked before, and even though this part of the conversation I'm about to bring up can really spawn a whole series, you had another trip to Africa a few decades later. Yes. With somebody that I highly regard, and learned a lot about the continent of Africa, and we know it to be as Kemet. His name is Asa Hilliard. And I know we're sort of jumping a few decades ahead, but because we're on the topic of Africa, I want you to let us know, one, how you met Mr. Asa Hilliard, and two, what that experience was like going back to the continent of Kemet/Africa, and what you learned from him.
Oh, man. Asa Hilliard grew up here in Denver, and I first met him at the University of Denver, but I didn't really know him. I just, but I wanted to go to Africa and go to the land of the pyramids. And so when I heard about this, I again let black magic happen. The thing that was so amazing about that trip was that every night, and it was a very large group that we went with, Asa would give us a 2-hour lecture about what we were going to see and how to interpret whatever the guide might tell us, so that we would see things that other people didn't see, and we would have a better understanding. I had never been to the pyramids and so forth, and to see them and the other pyramids and the many pyramids that are around there and the Sphinx and places like that, but also to go down in the southern part where the Aswan Dam is buried and has covered up a lot of what we would call Black history, because that's where the Nubians live. And the Nubians are clearly African people. The other Egyptian people, you know, there's some mixture in that, but they're African too, the older ones. But you've had an invasion from the Arabs and so forth. So what we call the Egyptians today are not the ancient people. They're related in some way, but not the ancient people. But down in Kemet, it was, you know, clearly and they received us as family. And Asa was so great about taking us there and working with the people, and they were building a school and so forth and so on. So it was mind blowing.
And to let everybody know, this was, you said, during the 90s, correct? Early 90s?
91. And okay. Right now, I also collect a lot of books. I have over, I think, about 2,000 books and magazines, including old Black Panther papers, Muhammad Speaks, Black Scholar, Negro Digest, and Black World, those kind of books. But I also have a huge collection on ancient Kemet. At least 200 books in that area. So I'm obsessed with collecting African art and books.
And we see some of the pieces of art in the background.
Yes.
Already, from what we see, a pretty interesting and very elaborate collection.
I probably have 600 plus items.
Wow. You know,
so my house is overrun by it and my garage.
Well, maybe sometime soon you're going to be able to sell some of those, and we'll talk about that.
They're all for sale.
They're all for sale. There we go. I want to backtrack a little bit because we jumped the gun, because I'm so intrigued by Asa Hilliard and the history of Kemet. But I want to take back, after your college years came to an end, what degree or what field did you go into right after your education?
Well, when I first went to the University of Denver, I was a business student. My uncle had influenced me to be interested in business. I didn't know very much, but I thought that was something. And so my first quarters were in the business school, taking accounting and so forth, and I did well in that. But in college, when you get there, one of the things that happens, your mind expands so much, and you get to know other things like sociology and psychology and, the movement. See, this is 1959 when I started. So the sit-in movement started February 1960. And I happened to meet Martin Luther King that January. He was doing a speech. And so all that just kind of caught me. So I went into the liberal arts arena and start studying all those kind of things. And I finally said, I need to have something that I can make a living with. And I start thinking about education, and I like to talk. And so I decided to become a teacher.
Wow. So that's an interesting mix of education, but yeah. it lends itself to being a well-rounded person.
Well, sometimes.
But plus, your world education by travel. So, I mean, in my opinion, you were far ahead of most people who graduate from college with any degree.
Right.
So did you go right into teaching, or were there some other stops along the way?
Yes, I was the first Black teacher at Lake Junior High School in Denver. It was just the beginning of them spreading out the Black teachers from, quote, the Black schools. Wow. And so I was hired to be there. And then I went to Manual High School, which is one of the traditional Black schools. And in the process, I created all the Black Studies programs. Short story on that, Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. The next day, the people in social studies downtown called me down to help write African American history, which we had been lobbying for and protesting about for many years. And thank goodness for the Panthers turning the schools out, so that's how that occurred. There's not much happens without the struggle, and there's casualties in that. So I got involved with that. I was also involved in the teachers union and organizing strikes and so forth. I had no fear that I would be fired, and if I got fired, I felt naively that I would be hired by other people because of my brilliance and that I was a good teacher and all that, which probably wouldn't be true if you get fired. But so when we called for a strike so that teachers would have the right to name their bargaining agent, I told my principal, we didn't even have the power to have an actual strike. It was just a sick-in. And I told my principal when he asked me, I said, well, I'm feeling very sick, so I probably won't be here tomorrow.
So, what you just talked about, all the things that you did and organized and were a part of, it sounds like a great framework for a career in politics. Can you tell us how, that began and when it began?
Well, how that began, we had a large community event in which we organized all the different agencies and groups in the Black community, from the sororities to the Black Panthers, to meet to talk about what we were going to do with the schools. The issue was, were we going to integrate the schools or whether we were going to look at community control like they were doing in New York and some other places. And there were some other issues like politics and so forth. So it was quite an event to have that range of people. And I was a teacher and didn't know very much about much of everything, particularly the power and all that type of thing. I just knew we needed to change things. And so there was a lady named B. Hall who was a counselor in the middle school, and she approached me and she says she would like for me to run for state representative. And I looked at her and I said, I didn't say it this way, are you out of your mind? That's where, because I said, I don't know anything about politics. I have no money, no organization, and no really desire, And so she was persistent. And the short story of it is that on April 4th, 1968, April 3rd, 1968, I decided that's what I was going to do. I said that, the establishment needs to have some competition, because I would be running against the most powerful Black figure in Denver, Elvin Caldwell. He was president of city council, and his son was the one who was running. So I said they need a little competition. And then the next day, the king was assassinated, and I said, wow, the heavens are speaking. So with no money, no organization, I went on the Black Magic Tour, and I won by less than 100 votes in the primary, and it was the most Democratic area in the state, so there was no Republican running against me. And then the next time, nobody ran against me, and then I decided not to run again. I'd done my job to mess up things. And then the person who succeeded me was Wellington Webb, who became mayor of Denver.
That's an amazing history. And what I've realized before we even started this broadcast is that you are a walking history book. You're a walking history lesson. And I appreciate this tremendously as a history nerd, as a person who, deeply respects the things that people before me have gone through. Like you were on the forefront, and it doesn't seem like you were looking for the fight or the struggle. It just happened to be a part of your life because of where you were.
Yeah, a lot of times, actually, I'm pretty shy and would rather be in the back and do that work. But sometimes there was nobody else to do the job. So, like when we caused the board to pass the Knoll resolution, which was to integrate the schools, I had organized the Black educators for the first time along with another teacher, and I was the first president. And while I was writing Black history in the administration building, I was organizing this boycott. And finally, they said, well, can't we cancel that? And I said, we got the votes on the board, we can. And they called a meeting and convinced us that, they were going to do that, which they eventually did. But I didn't know that we were going to be able to pull off the boycott, because we had the first meeting was about 200 black teachers, but only 50 of them really committed to going out. And I knew that I couldn't even count on that. So when we found out that we didn't need to, I was really happy to make sure that we could cancel it.
So tell us the time frame that you were a state representative. What decade or time frame was that in?
1968, I was elected, and the term starts in 69, and then the next 2 years up to 73.
Were you still teaching at that time, or did you just?
Yes.
Wow. So you were a full-time educator and a full-time state representative.
Yeah, while I was in the legislature, I took a leave of absence for that time. And the pay there was so poor that even on a teacher salary, they give you a little bit. I think it was $4,000, you know, and so it was interesting.
Wow. That, you know, most people, I think what you've opened a lot of people's eyes to is Denver wasn't a big name in the civil rights movement as far as most people are concerned. You know, you hear about Alabama, you hear about Atlanta, you hear about the March, you know, all the places in the Southeast. But you were doing things like this in Denver, in Colorado, a state that's sort of not on the map politically when it comes to civil rights. So this is an amazing time in history.
Well, yes, and Colorado's had an interesting history. We had a black lieutenant governor during this time period, George Brown. We've had more political people compared to our percentage than most people would do in important parts. So, you know, we were out there, and one of the major Supreme Court decisions on desegregation was from Denver. It was the Keyes case, in which the court said that if you can prove a de facto segregation in part of a district, they must integrate the entire district. So that what generated what we call busing, or what the whites call forced busing. You know,
wow.
So it was a very important case. Keyes,
wow.
the Board of Education.
I'm starting to realize that this episode needs to be picked up by the History Channel. So I'll go on that campaign for you, because these are things I did not know. I really did not know. So now I feel a lot more enlightened. I feel a little bit smarter. I really do.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So after you finish your term as a state representative and you continue your education career, you know, tell us a little bit about. Well, I'm gonna touch on this first, because you talked about writing curriculums for African American studies and, you know, in these places, and then I want you to get into the fatherhood aspect of your life. So let's begin with some of the things that you would teach young people about African American history or African history.
Well, and I didn't know a whole lot, and you know, I was learning as I was going along, because it certainly wasn't in the history books, and hardly any of my teachers even mentioned anything about blacks. And not being in the South, where blacks often got more black history, so to speak, I didn't have that. So I had to do a lot of it on my own, and then as I began to explore, I found just so much that it was, whoa. So I always wanted to have the kids to experience a lot of it. So I had a course called Black Experience, which dealt with the 60s and only the 60s. And so I would show like Eyes on the Prize and let them see the demonstrations and feel it. And then we would talk about it and so forth. So my goal was to give them an experience of the things that they had no way to understand, and then hopefully get them involved in some activism.
Wow. That, to me, that's amazing, and important work. Now, I know that you are a father, but tell me about when, you know, that all happened for you amidst all the things that you were involved with and all the accomplishments that you were having. You know, where does, you know, a marriage or children come into play with all this?
Well, my son was born in 1971. An amazing young man, very, very bright. And I can remember I was in the legislature, so I would take him at times to the legislature and let him experience some of that, or if I had a meeting. I was a very active father. I was a hands-on father. I was there when he was born and saw that process. And when I got a divorce, I fought for custody and actually won custody. I didn't prove my wife as a bad mother or anything, because she wasn't. But my son wanted to be with me more than with her, and that was very brave of him. And we turned it into a good joint custody, and we're still good friends. So we've been close like that. And when he went to school down in University of Tulsa, he got real active and so forth. My neighbor up the street, the next block over, was Lauren Watson, who was head of the Black Panthers here in Denver, and was one of the court cases that is, you can probably Google Lauren Watson and the Black Panthers and come up with some of the things for him. But Lauren, when I decided to run for legislature, I was talking to Lauren about it, and he says, "Oh, I'll support you." I said, "Lauren, if you come out publicly, I'm dead. They already think I'm a radical because my hair is 2 inches long, and which was very small in those days." And he said, "No, I'm going to just work silently." And so we had the inside-outside type of relationship. I would work on the inside, and he was working on the outside. And that's what's necessary a lot of times. We have not been successful in this country with any means that we've used to gain freedom. We get a little bit, but not very much. And so I look at that almost any method, we need to encourage, because we don't know what's going to happen. And we've tried integration, we've tried separation, we've tried revolution, and we've tried migration. And they've killed all of those because white supremacy is a fundamental part of this nation from its very core.
Well, there you have it. I mean, you're hearing it right from somebody who lived it, who is living it, who is a testament to our actual history, not what's in the history books. And we can get into a whole another very deep conversation about that. But what I would like to stay on, to keep with the theme of this whole series, is that, with what you were involved with and becoming a father, did it reshape your thinking or approach to any of your political action? Did it reshape your thinking or action in how you approach career or any of those parts of your life?
Well, in politics, I didn't have any limits because my area was so politically dead. I could do anything I wanted to without any consequences. So, which was very bad. I encouraged people to run against me. That's how bad it was. So, whatever I wanted to do and say, I did. But I always made sure that I had to spend time with my son, made sure I went to all his basketball games and all his activities and put those times in. Because there were other times in which, I wasn't around as much as I would have liked to. But, we've always been very close. And he has 2 sons. One's 14, trumpet player at the School of the Arts here in Denver. And his brother, who's 16, a senior at Thomas Jefferson High School, who's near a genius. If he did his homework, he would really be outstanding. But, I mean, his test scores are just off the charts, So he's looking at going to Stanford and some other places at 16. Well, he'll be 17 in a couple of weeks. But, so now I'm working to see how I can help him see some alternatives in terms of colleges and so forth. He's interested in art and the technology and gaming and Japanese and all those kind of things. And so my job, I see, is to try to find resources that will give him opportunities, and he can go from there.
Wow. And, I really have my face hidden for most of this because my eyebrows are going up a lot of the things that you talked about. You have quite an amazing collection. We talked about it briefly earlier of African art.
Yes.
I know you're deeply involved with that. Tell us about, if you could summarize what your African art collection means to you, and what people can learn from it. Please share that with us.
Well, first of all, African art, it's an obsession that just kind of grabbed me and took possession of me. Because I didn't realize that's what I was going to be doing. And I was interested in Africa. And because I'd heard all these Tarzan things as I was growing up. And when I was growing up, to say that you are an African, well, those were fighting words. And if you said you were a black African, you got your butt whipped. You know, that's the kind of thing we came. So when Stokely Carmichael and others began to talk about black is beautiful, that was such a contradiction to how we were raised. So I began to understand a little bit more when I went to Africa and saw a lot of the lies that had been said just aren't true. Then I wanted to know more and more. And I stumbled upon, buying some African art. And then I stumbled upon a man named Peter Natan, who taught me a lot about the art and introduced me to different traders and so forth. So now I'm famous. Traders from all over the United States that have come from Africa, come and see me. I had several last week, Now my thing is not to buy, it's now to help other people do it. What I'd really like to be able to do is to create a cultural research center in which my art would be there, because I have maybe 600 plus pieces and my 2,000 books and so forth, where artists could come and get inspired. I have a young man named Thomas Evans, who you'll probably hear about as an artist and a photographer, who's taken some of my masks and he's hired some models who are African or African American, and then put these in different positions. I just saw today where he was at the sand dunes here in Colorado, and it's spectacular. Those could be in a book all by themselves. And he's used others where it's in a bar and different scenes, so that you can begin to see the power of African art. Modern art, what we call modern art, that abstract art, came from Africa. Picasso, when he saw African art and his friends introduced him to that, he began to build a collection. There's a book on his collection. He must have had several hundred pieces of African art. And that inspired him to do some of his best work. And, so African art, which is always symbolic, and it brings in the religion and it ties it all in. It's not like Western art, which is meaningless, which is, they're more dealing with form and shape and that type of thing. Even though the African artists were masters at that, that wasn't their purpose. They would always have a religious, social importance there. So as I began to understand this, it became more and more. And I've collected more and more and find that I don't know much, but I'm gaining.
Well, I just learned a whole lot right there. And so, what I want to do now is, for those that are very interested in getting into art, and knowing that you have pieces available, could you share with us, how can people see your collection? How can people maybe make a purchase? Do you have a website to share?
Yes, I'm working with a company called Soho Prints, and their website is www.sohoprints.com. And you'll find there's an African mask on there, and I have about 75 pieces that are, then you get the prices and everything, and you can purchase them through that. That's the best way to do that, because they're marketing me worldwide, and I'm trying to balance off my craziness with with some financial responsibility. But also, I have a problem. What am I going to do when I'm gone with all this? It's my family can't handle this. I mean, given all just in the space, so that's the best way to do that. Also, you can reach me at PLHAM41 msn.com. That's my email address.
Now, one thing I think I want to make sure people know about this because of all of your amazing experiences is that you have written a book.
Yes.
Now, shameless plug time. Shameless plug. Show us the book.
Okay. Can you see it there? It's
It
called
looks like
African Peoples' Contributions to World Civilizations, Shattering the Myths, Volume 1. And you can go on Amazon and get it as an ebook. I'm trying to get this reproduced as a hardback, because a lot of people like hardbacks or at least softbacks. But I've done 3 printings, self-printed, over 10,000 copies. So it's been used in schools all across the country and even in some colleges. And it's
now,
written with a
while
lot of pictures and proof.
while you hold that book up, that picture you have your hand on is a statue that people may or may not know exists in the Americas.
Yeah.
Tell us a little.
Olmec people.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about that. We'll leave them with one last history lesson. Tell us about the Olmec people.
The Olmec people were the generator of what we call the American cultures, the Mayas, the Aztecs, and people like that. And they carved these, there are at least 17 of these that you can go to Mexico today and find. These are like 6 feet, 10 feet tall, several like 10 tons, and obviously have an African face. And the anthropologist will tell you that what they are is that they're not African, but let me just see if I can find this picture right quick here. See this one here? Look at that. Is that a black man? And there's many other pictures that would show, and I go through and give you the proof. And this really comes from Ivan van Sertima book. Get his book, They Came Before Columbus. So 2,000 years before Columbus, African people were in the Americas. There are animals from Africa. There are plants that were from Africa. There are stories in West Africa about ships going west. There are currents that would take people there. The proof for me is overwhelming. And I'm not the first on this at all. Just start digging into it. There's a lot of information. A lot of the Afrocentric scholars have noted this.
So you just made an amazing claim. I mean, we just got finished celebrating Columbus Day. And you mean to tell me that 2,000 years before Columbus came to the Americas, Africans came? Is that true?
Here's some small pieces.
Wow.
And at the bottom here, and it's hard to see, but it says the date is 1000 BC.
BC.
BC. Yeah.
Wow.
I
happen to, I'll admit that I'm a history nerd. I've learned about these things previous to our conversation, but for those that, are willing to research for themselves, I'm not going to make you believe anything, but the resources are there. My guest tonight has a book that you can get. I highly recommend that you get it so you can see the proof for yourself. We went through a lot of different topics tonight, and I want to thank my guest, Mr. Hamilton. What I want you to do, Mr. Hamilton, is if there's one message that you can share, that you focus on in your life of sharing, what's that one message you would have, especially to the men watching, to the fathers watching? What would that message be?
Give up your excuses. Get in action. Don't be afraid.
Okay, I'm listening. You were talking to me, right? You were talking directly to me, and I receive it. I accept it.
Well, we all are afraid at times. And at times we don't know what to do. I run workshops for parents on how to get them involved with their kids at school. And one of the first things I tell them they need to do, they need to find out more information about schools and that type of thing, but they need to find somebody else with them to go with them so that you have support to talk about things and problems and issues. And you go as at least a pair and maybe even more, so that you can do the job. The job is huge. These are very challenging times and a lot of craziness, just a lot of craziness. And your kids have to be well equipped to deal with the madness in order to survive. And most of them are not well equipped. The first thing is that they have to learn to love themselves and know that they're okay in spite of some of the mess ups that they will do. And once they get that, then they have a chance. They're going to have to deal with drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And they're going to have to deal with racism institutionally and also individually. And the institutional is the most difficult part to deal with. And you just have to love them and give them the encouragement that you can and tell them about your mess ups. They need to hear that.
Well, there you have it.
That was more than you asked for.
It was perfect, and I love the wisdom that you were sharing. And as we wrap up for tonight, I want to say thank you once again to my guest, Mr. Paul Hamilton, an amazing person, an amazing resource. So reach out to him. Make sure you go to his website and check out his art, sohoprince.com. And as I wrap up for tonight, you know, this series for me has been an amazing series, and I'm really honored that I get to interview people like Mr. Hamilton. So as I wrap up for tonight, again, I say that again, I want to say thank you for your most valuable commodity on earth, which is your time, because once you give it away, you'll never get it back. God bless you. See you on the next episode of Purpose Driven Content on fatherpreneurship.com. Bye-bye.